Hello, and welcome to the 6th video of the CodeGenHero tutorial series. In this video, we will begin work on our artist site Blazor application itself, and access our web API through generated classes to render data-driven content onto the browser. Now that we've generated and registered all our boilerplate classes, we can finally get into building the actual Blazor application itself. So, to begin, we're going to go into the app project, and we'll be creating a page here. So what a page is in Blazor is a razor component. Now these can also be components that you put on pages, but everything in Blazor is made out of these components. So what we're going to make here is a simple page to list the media from our database. I believe that would be paintings, photography, and colored pencil drawings. So we're going to give this the simple name of list media. And so just like that, we have our first razor component, but what we're going to do is we are going to get rid of all this starting markup. And instead, we're going to put in a page directive that will allow the Blazor routing component to navigate to this page. So now, when the user uses our application, if they navigate to the URL and then add /media on the back like this, they will come to this completely blank page that has no content on it, which we are going to fix in a moment. So one thing that comes with our project template is Blazor, a component library that helps you rapidly get comment styling and functionality out of the box, rather than having to spend time making all that those boilerplate components. So what we're going to add is a mud text, and we're going to give that mud text the styling of typo.h3, as in header 3. And now in that header, we are going to designate that this is the media page. I'm going to give that a couple of line breaks as well to space it out from where we're going to put below it. And now, instead of putting this page content in the page itself, we're going to put it into a separate component which will handle all the data-driven logic rather than directly putting data access on our pages. So to that, we're going to go to this components folder, and we're going to once again make a razor component. But unlike last time, this is not going to be a page, but instead a component that we place onto our pages like an HTML tag. So we're going to give this one a name that simply describes its purpose, and I'm going to call it Media List. Once again, we're going to clear all this starting markup. And now what we're going to do, instead of getting to this right away, we are going to build out the view model component that works in the background to drive its data access logic. So we're going to do this by adding a class, once again. And I'm going to call this medialist.razor.cs, which will nest as a child of the medialist razor component. So first things first, we're going to have to change the name of medialist because it currently shares the name with our medialist razor class, which this is fundamentally not. So we're going to add on medialist view model to make the name unique. And then, in order for a razor component to use this view model, it has to inherit from component base. This comes from the Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components namespace, but we're actually not going to import that because we're actually going to inherit this from another view model class which inherits from that already instead. And that would be CGH component base, which comes from our shared namespace that comes with the template. So this is going to be our next destination to start editing. So what we're going to need in order to access data is our Web API data service, which we generated previously and injected in the previous video. So I'm going to add that as a new new protected property. And we'll give it a simple name of Web API data service. And then just to be sure, we're going to give it a default so that we protect against compiler warnings. And then lastly, in order for it to be injected, we need to use this inject attribute on top. That will tell the Blazor framework to get it from dependency injection. And now with that out of the way, we are going to go back to our media list view model. And we are going to make a property of our... We're going to make a list of medium, which will be the list of our media. And lastly, we're going to default it to a new list so that we can guarantee at runtime that this list is not null. And now we're going to make use of an event in the Razor component lifecycle that will run when this component is instantiated, called onInitializedAsync. This comes from the original component base and is what we're overriding. So in this, we are simply going to set media to an awaited call to the Web API data service for its getAllPages media async method. And now in our component itself, we can now make render markup that will be based off that retrieved data. But first, we're going to need to inherit from the view model itself. So we're going to add an inherits directive at the top of the page, which will point back to this media list view model class name. And now we can begin work on our markup. We can start by entering into C# logic mid-markup by starting with an @ symbol and then entering our keywords. So we're going to start with a for each loop based off of our media property. Note that we put the link href within the separate variable rather than referencing it directly in the href here, as you cannot perform string interpolation in the middle of a property field on a Razor component. And now that we have established markup for our media list component, we can now invoke it in the list media page. So we're going to do that by opening up an HTML tag and entering in the name of media list as if it were a normal HTML element. And then finally, before going to look at it on the actual site, we are going to have to add some navigation to it. So let's go to our main layout, which is going to be in the shared folder. And here you'll find the section under mud nav menu. This is what holds our navigation links. So we're going to add in an additional mud nav link, and we're going to point it to the /media route that we made for our list media page. And now when we start our application, we should be able to navigate to a media page that will automatically list the media from the database. Now, back in our Blazor application, we can see this media navigation link in the sidebar here. So let's go to it. In about a moment, our media should be loaded in. Now, depending on your purposes, you may want to beautify this loading time a bit better. There is a Mud Blazor component that can help with that. And like that, we have our 3 media pages, but they are nothing more than hollow links now, and if we try to click on them, well, we're going to get to a 404 page because we have not built those out yet. So that's what we're going to do next now. See, there's nothing at this address. So now we're going to make those pages, and we're going to do something a bit more advanced with our service. to make these work. So we're going to go back to Visual Studio and just kill this process. And then let's begin. So once again, we're going to be making a page here, and we're going to make this media detail. So once again, make a Razor component. And we'll give it this name of medium detail. And now, as before, we'll get rid of our markup that we start with again. And then we are going to add another page directive to designate this as a page. But unlike last time, we're going to add a little new element to it called a route parameter. Now, what a route parameter is in brackets, like you would in a code block, you'll specify a property name and then, separated by a colon, what that primitive type is going to be. So in our case, it's going to be medium ID of type integer, which we'll add in now, like so. And now this page's route is going to be /media/ the ID of the medium we select in the previous media list page. But in order to use that, we're going to need to set up our properties. So we're going to follow the same pattern as we did with our media list and create a separate view model class in the background, which is going to be called mediumDetail.razor.cs to use the same nesting feature in Visual Studio. Once again, we'll give it a unique name and make it inherit from our CGH component base. And now in here, we are going to add in our property for medium ID, which is an integer. And we should make that public in this one. And finally, in order to make sure that this is exposed to the routing component, we will decorate this with the attribute of parameter. Now, in addition to being route parameters, the parameter attribute can also be used on components to pass values in when they are instantiated from page markup, which we are going to do with our next component that we use to list the assets for this page. So we're going to call this one medium artwork. As usual, clear the existing markup, and then make an additional class to serve as its view model. And now in this class, we'll add a parameter for our medium ID, which will be used to drive the logic that occurs during this component's runtime. Once again, it's going to get the parameter attribute, but we're going to add on an additional attribute this time, which will mark it as a required property to be provided by pages that invoke it. And this attribute is called editor required. Now, if we attempt to use this component in markup without providing the medium ID, the compiler will throw an error about it, which enforces that anyone who uses it must provide the required properties to it. The method we're overriding this time, onParameterSetAsync, is similar to what we used before, but it runs slightly later in the Razor component lifecycle, after the parameter properties have been set. So, in our schema, artwork is not directly related to a medium. Instead, it's related through a separate xref table. So instead, we're going to have to first retrieve our xref table from the database, and then after we will retrieve our artwork from that. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a list of iFilter criterion that's used by our generated Web API data service class to filter down retrieved data. Now, a filter criterion that we generated follows the pattern of the name of the field you want to filter by, the condition you want to filter against, and the value you expect to be used in that filter. So in our case, what we're going to want is artwork medium xref medium ID, the is equal to condition, and then equal to the medium ID set here. And now with our list of filter conditions created, we are going to invoke the Web API data service to get a list of artwork medium xrefs that we'll then use to get our artwork. So we're going to give that a simple name of var artwork medium xrefs. And we are going to await the Web API data services get all pages artwork medium xrefs async method. And then finally, we're going to pass in our artwork medium xref filter as the parameter for it. And now, once this is done, we will have our list of artwork medium xrefs to start populating our artwork against. If you want, you could break out this logic into your own separate method for cleanliness, but for our sake, we're just going to keep it as is right now. And now we are going to break out this artwork medium xrefs list into its list of artwork IDs from it. And then we will convert that list into a string delimited by vertical slashes. We do this because in order to pass it as a criteria, a list must be instead a vertical slash delimited string rather than a list object. So now we're going to make a new artwork filter criteria that checks to see if our artwork ID is contained within this listed string we've built. And now we are going to make a variable, another property, and this is going to be a list of artwork, following the same pattern as our list of media before. And now we're going to set that artwork list property to the result of a call to the Web API data service to get all our pages of artworks that fit this criteria. And now when we instantiate this component and provide a medium ID, it will quickly get a list of artworks within a few moments from the API. But first, we're going to need to actually display all this. So first, let's go back to our medium artwork markup, and we are going to inherit from the view model we just built out. And now we're going to build another component which takes a list of artwork provided to it and then renders it out onto the page. So once again, add a new component. And we're going to give this the name of artwork list. And inside this artwork list view model, we are going to give it a property that is a list of artwork that will be provided to it by a parent component which adds artwork. Now, unlike with our previous components, this component will not be concerned with data access at all. Instead, it'll be focused purely on rendering out these artwork information into markup for the page. So, while for an actual artist site you might want this to be a bit more fancy, we're going to break this out as a simple unordered list that lists the names of our artwork for this medium. Once again, we'll make use of a for each loop to iterate through our artworks property like we did with media before. And so we're simply going to access the artwork and get its name property to print out onto the screen in a list item element. And now when we render this out in our medium artwork component, we will get a list of our artwork for this medium. Like this, we supply the artworks property from here into the parameter field of our artwork list component. And now back on medium detail, let's make sure that we inherit from our view model that we built out before. And now we will render our medium artwork component, passing in our medium ID as the parameter. Now, as one final small touch, we may want to render the medium's name onto the page as well. So let's go back to our medium artwork view model and actually retrieve the medium itself, which we will have to represent as an additional property on the view model. So getting a medium is going to be slightly simpler than before. Instead, all we have to do is provide the medium ID that we get from our parameter. So with this, we'll await a call to get medium async, passing in our medium ID as the parameter. Just as a small correction, we're going to want to wrap the awaited call to get medium async inside of parentheses and then get data from it, which will be our medium object. And we'll get the result of that call, and then that will give us our medium. And so we're going to add markup for the medium, and we'll make it as an H3 like with our medium name before on the media list page. Just to be safe, we'll make sure to null check the medium before continuing with it. And then if our medium populates correctly, we will see the medium name as well as the list of artwork that came from it. So now, once again, we're going to run our application. And now, once again, in our Blazor application, we can go to the media page. Give it a moment to get the media from the database. We'll go to photograph, and then in a few moments, it will get the list name of the medium as well as the artwork associated with that medium. And now if you wanted to, you could use these artwork objects to either display the artwork itself, make them links to a more detailed page showing a full-size image, and so on. We have an example of a completed version of this app on our GitHub, which you can check out, which is linked in the description below.